My dad threw me out at Christmas while my son was in cancer treatment, and unraveling his control forced me to grow boundaries, uncover what he'd hidden, and choose a different kind of family. It's a long, human mess of love and loss, receipts and consequences, and a hope that doesn't ask permission. I can still see the glaze pooled at the edge of the ham, sticky gold under those chandelier bulbs that always made your face look a little more tired than you wanted it to. The pine needles crusted against the heater vent, the dog pacing because of the storm outside, and my dad's ring, heavy and dull from decades of work, tapping the side of his water glass like a gavel. "Enough," he said, and his voice hit me from the side, because I'd been focused on Oliver's hands, on how carefully he held his fork now. He'd learned not to shake the peas off. He was 7 that December, my kid, my whole heart with buzzed hair and serious eyes. He had a tiny scar where his port had been, a small crescent you could only feel if you knew to press your finger there. He swung his socked feet under the dining chair and pressed his lips together, because he could read a room. We'd had a year to teach him that. "Enough," my dad said again, and his ring tapped, and it sounded like the way he used to set the lug nuts on the bench before he tightened them. Calm, deliberate. I loved and hated that sound. Rita folded her napkin. She was my stepmom, Rita with the shellacked hair and the perfume that smelled like peonies. She didn't look at me. She never looked at me in moments like that. She looked at my brother, Mark, because she wanted someone else to do the work of breaking. Mark scratched his beard. He had gravy on his knuckle. He saw me watching him and wiped it on his jeans and shook his head like, "Not me, please don't pull me in." My dad's jaw shifted over and back, an old habit he'd picked up after he cracked a molar 20 years ago. "We can't keep doing this," he said, eyes on the ham, not me. That was also part of the dance. He never accused you while looking at you. He accused a surface, and you were supposed to understand that it was you. The table, the roast, the air. I said, "What is this, Dad?" Because I could play, too. I could make him say it. Oliver's hand brushed my sleeve just once. It was his way of quietly saying he was here, that he was trying to be brave, that I should not go too far. "This," my dad said, and he gestured vaguely, taking in the house I had helped clean that morning, the extra folding chair we'd squeezed in to fit Tasha and the kids, Mark's new jacket still draped over the banister, a paper chain Ollie had made looped around the banister post with crooked tape. He gestured at the pipe of mashed potatoes I'd whipped with too much butter because Ollie could keep those down. He gestured at my duffel bag still next to the front door, packed and repacked 100 times that year with a ritual that never made me feel ready. "This reliance," he said. "This leeching. You can't stay here anymore." He didn't say my name. He said it with a vague sweep toward the stairs, toward the space that used to be my room and was now Ollie's nest of socks and picture books and a medicine schedule taped to the wall with brittle masking tape. He said it like he was redirecting runoff around the foundation of his house. He said it like the solution was simple. The storm pressed at the windows. Rita's mouth pinched. Mark tried to catch my eye again and then flinched at himself, because that had always been our tell. We were kids in a house built of pronouncements. Ollie whispered, "Mom," quiet, like a secret. I reached for his hand and smoothed my thumb over the soft place where his baby fat hadn't caught up with the rest of him yet. The table smelled like cloves and oranges and bleach. I could feel the muscles in my back drawing tight like a zipper. I could feel all the words I could pick, the ways I could slice and let it bleed, the ways I could stitch and keep it inside. All of that happened in a flash, like lightning opening and shutting a sky no one else saw. I didn't cry. I stared at the ham and counted down from 10 inside my mouth, tasting metal. I reminded myself of this basic truth. Roofs can be bought, found, borrowed. Outlines can be redrawn. What I could not replace was the small warm hand in mine. "Okay," I said. I made my voice calm so Ollie's breath wouldn't hitch. "Okay." And I leaned, and I pressed a kiss to his hair, and I tasted salt, and somewhere in my chest, a room with a locked door, something old and tired stood up and left. Before it broke. I grew up in a house where the thermostat was set by the ache in my dad's knuckles. If his hands hurt, we got heat. If bills were tight at the shop, We put on sweaters and were told it built character. Our house sat on a block of near-identical ranches in Kettering, just south of Dayton, where the curb cuts were all the same and the lawn ornaments rotated with the holidays like they were on a timer. My earliest memory of my dad, Dennis Monroe, isn't of him holding me. It's of his boots outside the door and the smell of oil. He owned a sheet metal workshop, a place with a bright Coke machine and posters of bending charts. He called it the shop, and he said it the way people say the church, with gravity. He cut his forearms on the edges of ducks and never made a big deal of bleeding. You learned not to either. My mom left when I was 7. She left a note under the sugar jar and a stack of folded clothes for me and Mark, and a week later our neighbor found the note because no one ever looked under the sugar jar. It said she wasn't built for this, and that sometimes the best way to love people was to not be the one they had to hate. I don't think she was wrong. I think she was the first person in my life who understood boundaries. After that, it was me and Mark and Dad. We had tuna melts on paper plates and learned where Dad kept the emergency cash, in the coffee tin behind the flour. We learned how to read a face and a room and a level of silence, like a weather report. We learned that love was given in rides to practice, that love was withheld by not replacing your busted sneakers until your toes actually poked through. We were never unsafe. We were sometimes unloved in a way you could name. Rita came when I was 12. She sold kitchen remodels at a home improvement store and wore crisp shirts that never wrinkled. She had a son from a first marriage we never saw and a laugh that sounded like a tiny bell. She moved in and put fake lemons in a bowl on the table, and she put a lock on the liquor cabinet because she said good boundaries needed hardware. I appreciated her in the way I appreciated a clamp. Functional, not warm. When I talk about my dad now, people want to know if he hit us. He didn't. He hit walls sometimes the way some people close doors a little too hard and pretend the house did it. He hit with words and he hit with the rules, and he hit with a kind of subtraction of money, attention, praise that had its own kind of bruise. He taught me to be useful. He taught me to make myself small in rooms where a man's jaw was working. I was not small by nature. I was talkative and liked to make lists. I learned to write my lists quietly. I got pregnant at 23. I loved a boy named Kyle Bennett, who kissed like he didn't know where he was going to be living next month. He wore a baseball cap backward and said "we" about everything, like we're going to get a place, and we're going to fix up that Honda. He also had a habit of forgetting to show up. He was not a bad person. He was a losing bet. When I told my dad I was pregnant, he stared at the sink and said, "You're smart enough to do this." And he meant both things. He meant I was smart. He meant I had chosen this, and so the cost was now my job to carry. He replaced the sink faucet that week and did not ask who the father was. I told him anyway. He fixed the faucet like the drip was insulting him personally, then went to the garage and smoked a cigarette even though he'd quit years earlier. He came back inside and made spaghetti with jar sauce and put a plate in front of me without a word. That was how he said he was in my corner. Oliver arrived on a bright day in May, when the peonies in the neighbor's yard were fat fists about to unfurl. He cried once, angrily, like someone had cut off the power to the building right when he needed it most. His hair was dark at first, and then went gold, the kind of gold that makes strangers think you must have good genes. His eyes were blue, and then gray, and then a green that landed somewhere like new grass. He looked like himself. I don't remember the first time he put his hand on my face, but I remember the weight of it. Baby hands are heavier than you think. He hated mangoes, loved strawberries, slept like a champion for 3 months, then quit sleeping at night like it was a habit he'd outgrown. He lined up his cars on the windowsill. He had a laugh that started in his belly like a hiccup and came out the top like a spritz from a spray bottle. He was exactly himself, and I kept checking to see if I was allowed to be that lucky. Kyle came in and out. He worked shifts at a warehouse and kept promising to get certified in something he'd read about on the internet, welding or coding or something to do with fiber optic cable. He loved Oliver when he was around, held him like he was a prize you could bring to show your friends. He loved me in a way that made me feel like we were almost about to be okay. He also sold my TV once because it was mine, not ours, and he needed cash for something he didn't tell me about. That was the night I put the pack and play in my car and drove to my dad's driveway and sat with my hands on the wheel for 3 full minutes before I went inside. "We can figure it out," Dad said, and he set down his beer. "But don't think that means you get to lean. I tell you that because it matters later." The way he framed it, the story he wrote for us both. For a while, we made it work. I got a job as a receptionist at a pediatric clinic that paid me in patients and health insurance. I liked the way the clinicians tilted their heads when they listened to kids, the way they handed me coffee without being asked. I learned codes for insurance companies and could tell you which ones were going to be trouble before they even put you on hold. Oliver started preschool 2 days a week, at a place with a mural of a caterpillar turning into a cartoon butterfly across the hallway. He loved the rice table and hated the texture of mashed potatoes. He loved trucks and the girl in his class named Asha who wore light-up sneakers, and he loved the bus driver who waved from the other side of the street every morning because Oliver waved first. He was that kid, the one you notice and feel better because he noticed you. He started bruising that summer. A weird kind of bruising, not in the places kids usually get them. He was 4.5, square in the age range where you catch a chair with your shin, where you forget the corner is there, and take it in the thigh. But this was along his back, and on his belly, where he hadn't bumped. His gums bled when he brushed his teeth, and we stood in the bathroom with a washcloth, and I told myself it could be almost anything. It wasn't. I knew before the pediatrician said the word. Her eyes did that thing where they go soft at the edges, and she put a hand flat on the counter for balance. "We need to go up to Dayton Children's," she said, and she spoke like she was setting down something breakable. "Acute lymphoblastic leukemia." All the syllables stacked, and then popped apart, and then slammed back in a chant. Acute. Lympho. Blastic. I could spell it by the end of the day. I could spell it in my sleep by the end of the week. We walked into the hospital, and someone gave Oliver a stuffed turtle with a bandana. Someone else handed me a binder and a schedule and a phone number for a social worker named Tessa who said, "You can call me about anything, big or small." I picked at my cuticle until it bled while a doctor talked about protocols and protocols for what to do when protocols didn't work. I nodded like someone's assistant. It was a way to breathe without making noise. The first night, Oliver fell asleep with a Paw Patrol episode frozen on the screen because I accidentally hit pause when I thought I was turning the volume down. His eyelashes rested on his cheeks like he'd put them there on purpose. The nurse, with a name tag that said Caroline, turned the screen off and pulled a blanket higher over his small lion body. "We're good at this," she said. "He's going to teach us who he is in here. We'll learn the rest." They put a port in the next morning. They started chemo. He vomited and then said, "Sorry, Mom," because he is the kind of person who apologizes for the fact his body did something he couldn't stop. I kissed his forehead and said, "You have nothing to be sorry for," and my voice took on that steady radio tone I didn't know I had. It was a tone I would come to hate and love. It was the sound of me coaxing myself across a river with no bridge. I moved back in with my dad and Rita because everything else felt like a set of stairs I didn't have the legs for. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and sawdust, like the past. We carried up Oliver's clothes and made the room that had been mine into a nest again. I put up the dinosaur poster I'd rolled on moving day like a promise. My dad stood in the doorway and said, "We'll make it work," like a pledge and a sentence. Money became the new weather. My job let me take unpaid leave. I learned the shape of my bank account by the taste in my mouth. The social worker signed me up for assistance programs and told me not to be proud like pride was a luxury item, and she was right. We got gas cards and grocery cards and restaurant gift cards from people who needed to do something. We got gift bags with lotion and socks in cheerful colors that I wore like armor. We got a check in the mail from a person I didn't know with a note that said, "For parking." I cried over the word parking in a public bathroom, quietly, the way women cry when they have to be efficient about it. My dad made a campaign out of it. He called it Operation Oliver, and he made a Facebook page and set up a GoFundMe with a photo of Oliver holding a little sign that said, "One tough kid." That picture was taken on a day Oliver had asked for pancakes, and I'd made dinosaur-shaped ones with chocolate chip eyes, and he'd eaten one bite and then fallen asleep on the couch with his plate on his lap. In the photo, he looked both brave and tired. It crushed donations out of people like fruit. "Let me handle it," Dad said. "People trust me." It was hard to argue with that. People in our town knew my dad. They'd brought him their busted gutters and their bent furnace vents for 30 years. They came to the shop and watched him smooth the edges with a file like he was calming an animal, and then they paid in cash because that's how it worked. He was loud and opinionated and had the kind of laugh that made people at the next table in the diner look over. It was the laugh of someone who didn't apologize. People like to give money to someone who doesn't apologize. He posted updates, photos of Oliver in the hospital bed with his stuffed turtle tucked under his arm, and people responded with hearts and words and money. My phone buzzed with notifications. The pile of cards on the counter grew, competing with Rita's fake fruit. Someone organized a meal train. The pastor of a church we didn't go to asked if he could add us to their prayer list, and I said yes because I will take kindness in any language it's offered. I avoided the services anyway. The money went into my dad's account. He said it would be cleaner that way and he would dole it out as needed so I wouldn't accidentally spend it wrong. "It's too easy to let it leak," he said, and he flicked the lid of the coffee tin with his finger, like you remind yourself what's inside by the sound. "Okay," I said, because I could feel that a no would cost me a roof. I told myself he was right about leakage, about oversight, about the way your brain turns to oatmeal when you don't sleep. "Okay," I said again, even though the word had started to taste like a penny. Rita taped the meal train schedule to the fridge and kept it neat. She said things like, "We don't need any more baked ziti," and she smiled with only her top lip. She put the gift cards in a ceramic bowl and said she'd keep them safe. She bought a label maker and labeled the label maker, and I laughed because nobody else could see that was funny. My brother, Mark, showed up with groceries and sat on the floor with Oliver, constructing plastic cities that rose and fell in the time it took Oliver to get tired. He said, "You can stay here as long as you need," quietly to me in the doorway, and then louder he said to Oliver, "No taxes in this town, man," and Ollie smiled because he liked when games had rules. In the early weeks, the hospital became our town. There was a routine to it that I could learn if I took notes. The morning rounds with the nurse practitioner who remembered to always put Oliver's stickers where he wanted. The phlebotomist who sang a dumb song and got him to hold still because she learned his rhythm and clapped to it. The evening sweeping of the corridor by the janitor with earbuds in, just swaying a little like he was at a concert only he could hear. Tessa, the social worker, who sat with me in the family room and folded napkins because it made her hands busy, and said, "There are no points for doing this alone." I did not know yet that grief is also a kind of labor, that you can do it with your jaw or your hands, with your whole body, and you can go to bed tired from it. I thought, then, that it was a feeling. I thought it was an event. I did not know it could be a job you do while doing all the other jobs. At night, when Oliver slept, I sat on the floor of the guest bathroom at my dad's house and texted with other moms I'd met on the oncology floor. We sent each other photos of the contents of our fridge, like, "Does anyone need cranberry juice?" And then we sent each other photos of our kids' faces in bed. It felt like a secret coven, a place where you didn't have to explain anything. I held my phone so tightly sometimes my knuckles cracked. A month in, my dad called himself team captain. He posted a video on the Facebook page. He wore his shop shirt with the name patch and talked about grit, and the camera shook because Rita was holding it and she didn't know how to keep her hands still. He said, "We're not asking for charity. We're giving you a chance to be part of something good." And I sat on the couch with Oliver's head in my lap and felt the floor tilt. He started handing me cash and then receipts. "Here," he said, with a grin that was all teeth. "Parking, gas, groceries." It felt like he was rewarding me for something I'd done right, like I'd given the correct answer in class. It worked until I noticed the pattern. I got cash and a set of rules. I got money and lost a little autonomy. "Don't use your card unless you have to," he said. "Let me keep the big picture in mind." "What's the big picture?" I asked once, and he smiled like I was a child. "Keeping power on," he said. "Keeping you from making any stupid moves." What would a stupid move be? I didn't ask. I knew better. In our family, stupid is subjective and defined by the person paying for dinner. In the fall, Oliver got better for a while. He was pale but bossy. He wanted to pick the route to the grocery store and tell me which cereal we should try because he liked the tiger's face. He went to kindergarten for 3 full weeks, and he wore his backpack with the dinosaurs on it and learned to ride a messy, oh, that slanted up like it was hopeful. He had a best friend named Jax who wore a cape to school on Spirit Day and insisted Oliver wear a bandana, too, so they could be a team. When Oliver made it to recess, the teachers told me he watched the games like a coach and then, when he had enough breath, joined in at the end to score the goal, like a punchline. We got a family photo at the pumpkin farm that might be the juiciest lie I've ever told. It is, objectively, a beautiful photo. Oliver sits on a bale of hay with his head tilted just so. I'm behind him, hands on his shoulders. The sky is this impossible Ohio blue, the kind that shows up after a week of gray and makes you think maybe you invented the color. I put it on the mantle. I still don't know if that was an act of hope or a dare. The relapse came right before Thanksgiving. His counts were off. His color went wrong. We pretended we were ready to hear it. We were not. The protocols had protocols. We went back to the hospital, and the floor greeted us like we'd been on vacation and returned home. A nurse I didn't know touched my arm and said, "We've got you," like a promise I didn't trust. My dad filmed a new video. He said words like fighter and warrior, and I wanted to hand him a thesaurus because he was saying those words at my son, and my son was a 7-year-old who wanted to learn to whistle. Rita put a spreadsheet on the fridge with a rotation for dinners and laundry and Oliver's medication schedule, color-coded. She printed it in landscape orientation and made it 3-hole punched and put it in a binder labeled Oliver Home Systems. I appreciated the effort. I also felt a little like I'd been turned into a project. At night, I sat on my bed and watched Oliver breathe. The chemo made him twitch sometimes, right at the moment before he fell asleep, like his body was a television losing signal in the storm. I stroked his back and told him stories about the squirrel that lived in the oak tree outside his window and stole Rita's toast when she wasn't looking. "He wears your socks as hats," I said, and he laughed silently, mouth open like a fish. "Mom," he whispered one night, so late the house was made of only our breaths and the refrigerator kicking on. "Is Grandpa mad at us?" I swallowed. "Grandpa's mad at the situation," I said. It's a thing adults say when they don't want to lie, but also don't want to spray shrapnel with a sentence. It is a kindness lie, and sometimes it's all you can manage. "He hits the counter," Oliver said, and he tapped his own fingers in a rhythm I knew too well. He was telling me what he saw.
"He's learning," I said.
"We all are." Oliver nodded and rolled toward me, tucking himself into my side. "Okay," he said, practicing the word on his tongue, the way you roll a marble from one cheek to the other. I kissed his hair and thought about how to keep the next storm out. We were a house of storms with a roof that held for now. We were a family because that's what you call the people who are there when you throw up at 3 in the morning, and because they're there when you wake up again. We were also an equation tilted by the weight of a man who believed that paying a bill meant he had paid for having a say. There are 1,000 choices in a day when your kid is sick. Who gets to make them matters as much as what they are. December came with lights hung crooked on the eaves and my dad's ring tapping the counter and neighborhood kids crunching past in boots. It came with a hospital tree decorated with ornaments made out of tongue depressors. It came with a Facebook fundraiser total that climbed and climbed, and a ceramic bowl of gift cards Rita shuffled like playing cards. It came with Oliver asking me what my favorite kind of snow was, the big clumpy kind or the dust that makes the street lights into halos. "Clumpy," I said. "Easy to catch on your tongue." He practiced catching them. He stood on the back step in his socks and held his face up to the sky, and I thought, I will memorize this, and then I failed because you always do, you don't ever get to keep it all. We were edging toward a day that had a way of making everything more itself. Christmas magnifies. It turns whatever you're into a picture book with bigger type. We were tired. We were broke. We were full of love. We were brittle. We were a house where my dad's word filtered the air we breathed. We were an accident waiting to happen, which is another way of saying a family. The pressure wasn't a surprise. The snap was. Pressure builds. The week before Christmas, Oliver got a fever, and we went to the ER like we always did, with a bag packed with socks because hospital floors are cold, and his favorite red hoodie because it smelled like home. They did their thing, blood cultures, antibiotics, oxygen check, and then sent us home because his numbers landed in that weird in-between where they don't make you stay, but they also won't promise you anything. We slept with the baby monitor again, 2 rooms from each other, like we had when he was a toddler, and I still got up every 2 hours to check that he was breathing. Dad watched the weather like it owed him money. He paced the kitchen and evaluated the snow accumulation against the data you could observe from the window, a meteorology act that mostly resulted in him being angry at the news. He said things like, "They're going to shut the city down for a dusting," and then he salted the front steps like he was mad at ice. He was out of sorts, which in our house meant he tried to be more in control. He inventoried. He reorganized. He tore apart the hall closet and repacked it like we were about to move. He went through the ceramic bowl of gift cards and made a spreadsheet of balances. "People donate because they want to help," he said, opening each one with a knife like it was a letter bomb. "People also need to know it's going where it should." "It is," I said. I spoke carefully. "It goes to groceries and gas, and sometimes to something that makes Oliver smile. Like a toy." He said the word like it was a slur. "Like a hot chocolate he didn't throw up," I said. "Like a blanket with sharks on it that doesn't scratch." He clicked his tongue. "You want to watch the big picture," he said again, and I had the urge to smash the big picture frame over his head. I didn't. I stirred the chili and thought about phones. Tessa had suggested I apply for supplemental security income for Oliver. "It's not a lot and it's a pain," she said, "but it could help. Also, hospital financial counselors are magicians. Let them work their magic."
She was right about the pain.
I filled out forms and mailed them, and then we waited, and then they sent more forms, and I filled those out too. When the approval finally came, the letter said they'd issue a back payment and then a monthly payment thereafter, to be managed by a representative payee. Dad took the letter out of the mail. He had this sixth sense about mail he could weaponize. He held it like he was presenting evidence. "Good," he said, eyes flicking across the page. "We'll get this set up. I should be the payee. I'm the one with stable income. I don't want that feckless boy you had a child with getting any bright ideas." He always referred to Kyle like he was an unclaimed piece of roadkill. "I can be the payee," I said. "I'm his parent." "You don't have steady income," he said, and he said it like a fact in a math book, not an accusation, even though it was both. "You have," he waved his hand. "Chaos. I'll keep records. Social Security likes records." I thought about the binder labeled home systems. I thought about the ceramic bowl. I thought about Oliver's humpbacked turtle, faithful in the bed every night. "I'll handle it," I said softly. He looked up then. "Emily," he said, and when he used my full name, my neck tensed. "You need me." There it was. There was the thesis statement of my childhood. It arrived like a stepping stone thrown across a river. He was offering a way to get across. He was also asserting ownership of the path. I could have said, "I need help, not ownership." I could have said, "I am 31. I could have said, "You are not the only person who can figure things out." I could have said 1,000 things, and I practiced them in the shower, and in the car, and in whispered calls to my friend Serena at 2 in the morning when you cuss, because no one's listening. In that moment, I swallowed them. "Let's talk to Tessa," I said. I put a hand on the counter to steady myself. "We'll set it up right." He snorted. "I've been setting things up right since before you were born." We met Tessa in the alcove by the family room on the oncology floor. She wore a cardigan with elbow patches and a string bracelet her kid had made. She sat with her knees together and a low center of gravity, like a wrestler listening for the bell. "I want Emily to be the representative payee," Tessa said, like it was not a discussion, like it was a recommendation from one professional to another. "She's the parent and primary caregiver." Dad smiled slow. "That's adorable," he said. "She's overwhelmed. She doesn't keep consistent records." I'm not questioning her commitment. I'm questioning her capacity. I had the weird sensation of seeing myself from the ceiling like a drone shot. I could see the ways I looked overwhelmed, the split ends in my hair, the stain on my sleeve from the coffee that sloshed while I parked, the way I curled into myself when he talked. He had curated that posture in me for years, and I had agreed to it out of survival. In that moment, the part of me that still wanted to be liked opened her mouth to say something. Tessa beat her to it. Actually, she said, and she did this thing psychologists do, where they lean just the right amount forward. What Emily doesn't have are resources. Capacity is a question of resources, not character. And, Dennis, with all due respect, Social Security doesn't choose payees based on who's loudest in the room. He bristled. His jaw twitched. I would never mishandle it, he said, offended at a phantom. No one is saying you would, Tessa said. We're saying we center the parent. Emily is doing this. You can support her. Your support doesn't require her compliance. It got quiet then. Like vacuum quiet, where you can hear the machine but not the proof of its work.
He stood slowly.
He adjusted his jacket like he needed an activity that was not wringing Tessa's neck. We'll see if Social Security agrees, he muttered, and then he left. I watched him walking away with his shoulders square, and I felt both safer and like I just pushed the first domino. I applied to be the payee. The letter took 3 weeks to come. He got to the mailbox first again. He showed me the letter at the foot of the stairs, holding it between 2 fingers like it was proof of something I was too dumb to understand. Denied, he said. His voice was sticky with victory. What? I reached for the page and he let me take it. The reasons were written in the kind of bureaucratic gray that allows for anything. They'd assign someone else, my father, based on financial stability and track record. The letter congratulated him on being an appropriate steward. My ears rang. Rita, I said, and then I stopped. Rita stood behind him, arms crossed. She had this way of arranging her face into sympathy without loosening any muscles. This is for the best, she said. Think of it as one less thing on your plate. I could have said, it's my plate. I didn't. I went upstairs and lay on the carpet and counted the dots on the ceiling because if I watched Oliver sleeping I would wake him up with the sound of my breath snagging. The checks came. The donations continued. My father reported, in monthly reports, that the money had gone to the mortgage and utilities and groceries and a portion of a new water heater. He said Oliver's proportion of the household was fair. He said he kept detailed records. You don't charge him rent, I said once, because I could not say it. I'm not, he said. I'm charging his needs against the household's needs, Emily. Do you want to be responsible for every time you turn on the heat to make him comfortable? It sounds logical if you squint. It even sounds reasonable if you're tired. It's also a way to justify control. It was always a way to justify control. I wasn't totally alone. Serena showed up with soft pretzels and wrapped me in a hug like she was trying to conserve my heat. She'd been my roommate in community college, and she worked at the coffee shop near the hospital now. She took Oliver to the window to count ambulances and texted me, "Your dad sucks," with a little skull emoji, and then, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll stand beside wherever you draw the line." Mark took me to lunch at the diner with the bright tiles. He looked tired in the way you get tired when the stress you carry is other people's. He asked, "How's he doing?" and we both knew he meant Dad, not Oliver. That's how it is sometimes you tree of in weird ways. Managing the brand, I said. He pinched the bridge of his nose. He thinks he's helping. I know, I said. He thinks control is love. Mark nodded. He thinks the opposite too. I learned to hide cash. Not in the coffee tin. My dad still kept his in there. I put mine under the 3rd floorboard from the closet in Oliver's room because it squeaked and no one ever pulls up a floorboard that squeaks. I wrote down every dollar I spent in a blue notebook with daisies on the front. I recorded the gift cards, the gas, the turns I took that weren't strictly rational, like the time I bought Oliver an expensive set of markers that made him feel powerful for an hour and then he forgot about them. That hour was worth more than the markers. You learn how to do that math. We had nights where we ate together like a normal family and Oliver told jokes he'd made up like, what do you call a snowman who lost his dog? A snowhound, which made no sense and made me laugh until I had to put my head down. We had nights where Dad didn't look at me and only addressed me in plural. You guys, even when it was me alone putting dishes in the sink. We had nights where Rita made something from a recipe card and put it in front of me and said, chew, because she had learned that when I was stressed, I forgot that basic step. I took what I needed and tried not to turn every act into a commentary. One afternoon, I came home from the hospital and found the back deck half torn up. Planks stacked to the side, the big saw buzzing, sawdust in the air like snow. "What are you doing?" I asked over the noise. Dad turned the saw off and squinted at me. "Fixing the deck," he said. "It's been rotting for years."
Now.
I gestured at the yard. "It's December." "I got a deal on lumber," he said, a little offended, like I'd insulted his religion. "Plus, Oliver needs a safe place to be outside." "Yes," I said. "He does." I looked at the new lumber, at the neat stacks of screws arranged like soldiers on the work table. "How are you paying for that?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I felt the ground under me tilt. "Receipts," I said. He leveled the tape measure at me like a wand. "Don't you start." I went inside and sat on the calmest step, the one that didn't squeak. I put my forehead on my knees and took slow breaths like Tessa had taught me. "In for 4, she'd said. "Hold for 4, out for 6. I did the math. It kept me from doing other math. Christmas cards started arriving. The photo cards with the coordinated outfits. The ones with quotes about peace in script that looked handwritten, even though it wasn't. Mark's had a photo of him and Tasha and the kids in matching pajamas, and I genuinely loved it because their faces were soft and easy, and I wanted that ease for someone I loved. Our card was a screenshot of a photo from the hospital lobby, where a volunteer Santa had let Oliver tug on his fake beard and then taken a nap on a bench with his hat over his face. I sent it to my 3 contacts who wouldn't judge me for not having it together. Serena texted back, "This is perfect," and a heart, and then, "Want to come over on Christmas Eve? I'll wear pajamas, too." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to say no. I wanted to live in a world where doing either didn't feel like a loaded choice. The night before the dinner, I found the envelope. It was not hidden. It was on the counter, opened, with the letter half out like it was stretching. It was from Social Security, addressed to Representative Payee, which is a lousy way to address a person like they're a robot on a game show. I read it because it was there, because it was about my son, because it was my business. They were requesting an accounting. An annual one. They listed the amounts paid. They listed the instructions. Show how the funds were used for Oliver's needs. I swallowed when I saw the numbers add up. The back pay had been more than I realized. The monthly amount wasn't nothing. In our world, it was the difference between me saying no to Ollie because it was right and me saying no because it was barren. They needed receipts. My dad came in as I was sliding it back in the envelope.
He stopped.
He assessed. "I'm on it," he said. "I want to see," I said. He tapped the letter with his finger. "I'll show you when I've organized it. You get upset when things aren't neat." "I get upset when I'm not respected," I said, and I said it quiet.
He heard it anyway.
"Watch your mouth," he said, but he didn't mean the words.
He meant the stance.
He meant my back getting stronger under me, the way I'd started carrying myself like someone who could decide things. That night I lay awake on Oliver's floor while he slept and listened to the house. The refrigerator and the heater and the dog's feet. Houses have heartbeats when you love someone inside them. The stars were just winter pinpricks beyond the blinds. I held on to the memory of Oliver catching snowflakes on his tongue and filed it under. Reasons to stay. Rita set out the good plates on Christmas morning. She put out the gravy boat. She polished the forks like we were going to be inspected. She turned on the carol station and hummed along off-key. My father stood like a general over the ham, calculating. Mark and Tasha and the kids came with a casserole and presents wrapped in brown paper with twine. Oliver patted down in his dinosaur pajama pants, hair sticking up, and I put a hand on his back and thought, we are doing this 1 minute to the next. We set places. We put napkins. We poured water. We lined up the kids and made them say one nice thing they'd noticed that week before we let them cut into anything with marshmallows on it. It works, that trick. It softens the room. Everyone named something small. The way the dogs sat on their feet, the way the snow looked on the cedar fence, how funny Uncle Mark's hat was, and then we sat. I took a breath. The lights blinked, as if the power wanted to applaud our show of normal. Then Dad cleared his throat and tapped his ring against the glass. The line crossed. There is a sound that happens when a room shifts from holiday to battlefield. It's not loud. It's a soft suctioning of hope out of the corners and a little tightening of throats, a collective recalculation. The kids keep chewing because they are smart and because they have learned you can survive almost anything with enough marshmallow on it. The adults glance at each other and then look away because no one wants to be drafted. Before we get too far into this, my dad said like he was starting a staff meeting, I think we need to talk about expectations going forward. Going forward, Rita echoed, nodding, because she liked phrases you could put on a spreadsheet. Mark shifted in his chair and reached for the gravy, like maybe if he got his hands busy, he could outpace the speech. Tasha put a hand on her son's shoulder under the table. I put a piece of ham on Oliver's plate and said, 2 bites, babe. Softly, like a liturgy. We can't keep doing this, Dad said. He did the vague gesture again, sweeping the table, the house, the holes in the roof none of us could see. We can't keep being a hostel. We've carried this. It's time for Emily to carry herself. I kept my eyes on Oliver's plate. I cut his ham into smaller pieces, so he wouldn't have to chew as much. It is a very odd thing to do something as mundane and tender as cutting food while someone dismantles your shelter. I can carry myself, I said. I meant it. I did not mean it the way he meant it, with a hook. You're living here, he said. You're not working. You're feeding off my pension and goodwill and the kindness of strangers. You are Leech, Emily. I won't sugarcoat it. The words kicked me in the shin, even though I had expected some version. I had not expected Leech, with its particular wetness, its suggestion of something sucking and shameful. Mark made a little sound, like a dog yelping when the screen door catches its tail.
Dad, he said.
It wasn't a full-throated defense, but it was a step forward. I loved him for that half step. Don't, Dad, me. He pointed his fork at him and then at me, generous, like he was spreading blame. I have bent over backward. I have done more than most men would. I have taken in my adult daughter and her kid, and I have fed them and clothed them and paid to keep this house running so she could go sit in a hospital all day and… Sit, I said, and my voice got sharp enough to scratch. Sit? That's an interesting verb, Dad. He rolled his eyes. Don't act like you're the only person in the world whose kid has problems. I have run a business. I have carried a family. I expect contribution. I contribute, I said. Labor counts, even if you don't invoice for it. You call that contribution? He laughed, but it was not a sound with any humor. It was an exhale shaped like a laugh. You think cleaning a bathroom covers what you cost? Dad, Mark said again, and his voice was lower now. The kids had stopped chewing. I could feel Oliver stiff next to me. I can't keep footing this bill, Dad said. I will not be held hostage by your crises. That's the phrase you used when you were 17, Emily, remember? You told me everyone's emergencies had to be your problem. Now look at us here. And your boy's father, you picked him, didn't you? That wasn't me. It's not my job to fix what you chose. I breathed. I tried to taste the ham so I would swallow instead of let the words gather and explode. I put my hand under the table and found Oliver's thigh. I squeezed twice. 2 squeezes means I love you. You can't stay here anymore, Dad said. He said it like a judge reading a sentence. And when he said you, he swept his hand, including my name, my son, everything that had my fingerprints on it. You have until New Year's. No, he added, like generosity was a risk. We're not doing a dragged-out thing. You'll make a plan and execute. We'll give you 2 weeks, and then we'll change the locks. Rita said, it's for the best, quietly, like she was putting a mint on the pillow. My fork clinked. I didn't remember dropping it. I didn't remember my hand letting go. I remembered Oliver's breath, quickening, his chest rising faster than I wanted, and the particular corner of my brain that always watched the numbers went humming. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, how long since the last anti-nausea dose, how far to the ER if this turned into panic. Mom, Oliver whispered. It's amazing how much a tiny sound can demand. I'm here, I said. Where will we sleep? He asked. Practical. My kid has always been practical. I looked up then. I looked at my dad, at the man who had shown me how to measure twice and cut once, who had told me the sharp end of the story matters more than the handle. I looked at his jaw going sideways. I looked at Rita, and I saw a flicker. Was it doubt? Or gas? Or a small person in there turning a coin over in her hand? The side that says loyalty, the side that says harm? Tasha's mouth was tight. Mark looked like he might throw up. I tried to picture the safe version of this conversation. There isn't one. Sometimes the only way to be safe is to get out of the room where someone thinks they own your life. Okay, I said, and I was back in the hook, calm, the radio voice that keeps you from exploding. Okay, we'll go. You're not going to argue?
He was surprised.
Maybe he wanted the fight. Fights are better than silence if you define your life by a door slam. I can't be in a house where my son hears me called a leech, I said. I won't teach him that shelter feels like this. We'll talk later, he said, like it could be undone if I said the right password. No, I said. We won't. Not about this. Mark stood. Dad, he said, and his voice cracked, and he didn't care if it did. You don't have to do it like this. Sit down, Dad said, old habits flaring, and Mark did, because some things get inside your bones and live there. I pushed my chair back. The legs made a sound like a scraped knee. I stood. My hands shook just a little. I put my napkin on the table and smoothed it, because order comforts me, even the fake kind. I leaned down and said to Oliver, let's go put on your shoes, and he nodded, solemn, like he was going to a ceremony where you are asked to be brave. We walked up the stairs. I could feel my father's eyes on my back like a tool set. In the room, I closed the door gently. Oliver sat on the edge of the bed and watched me. His face was a little too pale, his lips too dry, but he was here. He put his hand in mine without being asked. Are we in trouble? He asked. No, I said.
No, baby.
We're not in trouble. We're making a good choice for our hearts.
He considered that.
He is the kind of kid who will take your statement and test it, throw it against the wall to see if it sticks. He nodded because he caught something in my voice that satisfied him. He slid his toes into his shoes and then leaned back, tired. I packed like I had packed 100 times. Underwear, socks, the medicine kit, the binder, the turtle, that red hoodie, 2 books, the photo from the pumpkin farm, because even when you understand that photos lie, you still believe they can tell the truth sometimes if you hold them right. I opened the bottom drawer where I kept the blue notebook with daisies. I put it in my bag. I counted the cash under the floorboard again because counting is a way to make a body feel safe. It was not a reassuring amount. It was enough if you define enough as makes you believe you can direct the car out of the driveway. Oliver watched me like he was measuring my breathing for a test. Do you think it will snow tonight? He asked. Maybe, I said. We can catch them at Serena's, he said, with the world's most direct suggestion, not entirely subtle. Yes, I said. We can. If she's home. He nodded. She has pretzels. She does, I said, and laughed, helpless at what kids remember when you are trying so hard to be a good adult. Rita knocked and came in without waiting. She held a Tupperware with ham and potatoes in it.
For later, she said.
She put it on the dresser. She stood there like she wanted to say something else. I'm not your enemy, she said finally, not looking at me.
Then help, I said.
She pressed her lips together.
This is helping, she said.
In the long term. I don't know whose long term you're thinking about, I said. She flinched. She looked at Oliver like she didn't trust herself, and then she left. I looked at the Tupperware and knew she had done the best she knew how. I also knew it wasn't enough. We carried our bags downstairs. The house felt like it always had in that weird way, like homes don't know when the people inside them are being gutted. My father stayed at the table. Mark stood, and then sat, and then stood again, like he couldn't find the right gear. Tasha hugged me like she was absorbing shock in her own body. The kids watched from behind the banister, eyes big, marshmallow strings on their chins. Where are you going to go? My dad said, not a question. We'll be fine, I said. It was a line you can say that ends a conversation without finishing anything. That boy needs stability, he said, as I moved toward the door. His tone had softened because he thought gentleness might help him get what he wanted. He needs safety, I said. Those aren't always the same. Mark said, and his voice cracked again. Text me. He added, I've got a little cash, and he slipped it into my coat pocket like we were kids and he was slipping me a note in class. I squeezed his hand. I love you, I said. He nodded and looked at our father, and then at me. I love you too. We walked out into the cold that bites your teeth. Oliver's breath did little smoke rings. He laughed because he was 7 and because cold makes you alive in an undeniable way. The storm had started the way Ohio storms start, testing its edges. Snow like salt from a shaker. The world had that hush to it that makes sound travel weirdly. Your boots on the salt, the wind from the highway 2 streets over, a dog bark like a clause with no sentence. We got in the car. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I took the first turn carefully, like early after you've been hit you drive like the cement is a trap. Oliver watched the streetlight shadows whip over the dashboard. Are we mad? He asked. We're sad, I said. We're allowed to be. He nodded. Do we still open presents? Yes, I said. At Serena's. I'm going to ask her. He nodded again, satisfied at the plan.
He leaned his head back.
Okay, he said, that word again, a bridge we kept being asked to cross. I pulled over 2 blocks away, in front of Mrs. Langley's house with the inflatable snowman that never fully inflated. I put my forehead on the steering wheel. I cried then because I could, because Oliver had closed his eyes, because sometimes you have to bleed at the side of the road to make room for the next thing. I cried with my mouth closed, like someone in a bunker. It didn't help. It did, a little. I texted Serena. Any chance you're home? Got room for 2? She responded in less than a minute, like she'd been waiting with her phone in her hand. Always, she wrote. Always, always. I put the car in drive. The snow fell thicker now, clumpier. Good for catching the plan or the breaking point. Serena lived in a duplex off Brown Street, near the university, where the houses looked like cousins with different haircuts. Her porch light was on, and her wreath was crooked, and a mug sat on the railing with a lipstick ring on the rim. Her door opened before we made it up the steps. She was barefoot on the wood floor, pajama pants, and a sweater with a hole at the sleeve. She smelled like cinnamon and the coffee beans from the shop that had sunk into her, a scent you carry when you've been in a place long enough to be its furniture. She didn't say what happened, because she already knew the outline. She pulled Oliver into a hug that was careful and long, and then she pulled me into one that was not careful. There's a futon, she said, and the couch that thinks it's a cloud. You're here. You're not leaving tonight. Oliver stood in the doorway and tilted his head up. The snow fell in those good clumps, fat phrases, and he stuck out his tongue and caught them. He laughed, and Serena laughed with him. I took a breath that went all the way to the bottom of me and hit the floor. Serena's apartment had 2 bedrooms if you were generous and counted the one that was mostly a closet with a mattress on the floor. We could flatten ourselves into it. She made hot chocolate with a fancy whisk and warmed the milk slowly so the pan wouldn't get that burnt ring. She said, I never liked your dad. And then, sorry that's unhelpful. And then, how can I be useful? That's the right order if you need to know for the future. I need to find a place, I said. Fast. I know a landlord, she said. He comes in to complain about the state of the world and order a cappuccino he calls the one with the foam. He has a building on Linden. It's crummy but cheap. She pulled out her phone and texted, Ask him now, and I nodded.
Done, she said.
He says he can show you a unit tomorrow morning. Tessa said there's emergency funds sometimes. I said, like I was speaking a language with new grammar. For first month's rent. For deposit. There are, Serena said. We can call her. Oliver curled under a blanket and set the turtle on the edge of the couch like it was standing guard. He didn't say much. He watched us and listened and stayed small, which is how he survives adult storms, a skill I wish he'd never had to learn. I texted Mark. We're safe. Please get Ollie's other hoodie and the med syringes I left on the counter. Rita texted me a photo of the Tupperware she'd set aside, like I needed proof, like the proof she wanted to offer was food instead of the absence she had cemented. Dad texted nothing. I did not expect him to. The next morning, when the city wore its sheet of clean white, we went to see the apartment on Linden. It was the top floor of a house that had been carved into 3 units by someone with a saw and an eye for rental checks. The stairs were narrow, and the railing a little loose. The kitchen had a sway to its floor I could feel in my ankles. The heating unit hummed like an old man. The landlord, a man named Peter with hair like a cat's tail and a cough that made me want to hand him a glass of water, looked at Oliver's face and then at me and said, "You look like trouble." "He's 7, I said, and Oliver piped up, 7.5. "Can you pay on time?" Peter asked. "It is a fair question. No one should be romantic about your bills just because your life is hard." I appreciated his bluntness. "I can pay if you work with me on the deposit," I said. "I can pay if I can get help from a fund. I can pay if the check starts." "What check?" he asked, always transactional. "SSI, I said.
His.
"It's technically mine to manage." "It's technically not because my father has it right now." He squinted. "You're the mom," he said. "Moms can do that."
Not always, I said.
"But we're working on it."
He considered me.
He looked at Serena. Serena looked back like she had burn-proof eyes. "Okay," he said, like he decided to bet on something that wasn't guaranteed. "I'll hold it through the week." Back at Serena's, I called Tessa. She picked up on the second ring.
"We were waiting," she said.
"I'm sorry. Are you okay?" "No," I said. "But we're okay." "Okay," she said, mirroring it back, the way good people do. "Here is what we can do." She laid out steps like stones, one after the other, across water. Emergency assistance from the hospital's family fund for first month. A letter I could bring to the landlord saying they'd pay the deposit directly. A call to the Social Security office to ask for reconsideration of the payee assignment, with her statement, and a letter from Oliver's oncologist saying I was managing all care decisions. "Gather everything," she said. "Receipts, notes, your blue notebook if you have one."
I did.
She knew me so well. "What about GoFundMe?" I asked. I'd been trying to keep that question off the main page of my brain. "What he's doing with it." "We'll start with the payee," she said. "One stone at a time." I called Social Security. The woman on the phone spoke like a robot who had been taught basic empathy and was trying it on. I gave her Oliver's number and mine. "The payee can be changed with proof," she said. "Approved caregivers, court orders, evidence of misuse." "What counts as misuse?" I asked because I wanted definitions. I wanted rules that applied like gravity. "Anything not for the sole benefit of the beneficiary," she said. "Food, shelter, medical care, personal comfort items. You can interpret those broadly. Not yard improvements or debt unrelated to the beneficiary. Not reimbursement to a household fund unless directly tied to the beneficiary's benefit." It was written like that somewhere. You can hear the policy in the cadence. "What about a deck?" I said, and my voice cracked. "He's rebuilding the deck." "Document everything," she said. I hung up and put my face in my hands and let the weight sit there until it softened. I called the Social Security office in person and made an appointment for after New Year's because holidays eat bureaucracy. I emailed Tessa the list. She said, "This is a plan the way someone says, you are learning to walk in a gravity that wants you down." Serena put a hand on my back. "You can do this," she said. "I know people say that like they're offering a mint. I mean it like here is a shovel." Mark came by with a bag of things we'd left, and he stood in Serena's doorway with snow on his shoulders and a look like he'd run to get there. "I'm so sorry," he said. "It's not your apology to make," I said. "It's important to not spread the blame to the people who are trying to breathe alongside you." He looked around Serena's place the way people do when they walk into safety, both relieved and a little raw, like the contrast makes their skin too thin. "Do you need cash?" he asked, practical. "I can sell the kite." The kite was his old pickup he'd nursed past the point of sense. He called it the kite because it had no weight in the back and drove like it might lift off in a stiff wind. "Don't sell the kite," I said. "We need people with kites around." He laughed a little and then it caught. He pulled out an envelope. "I had this set aside for the water heater we'll need eventually," he said. "I want it to be your water heater." I took it. I wanted to hand it back because pride, and because I have always wanted to be the one who never needs a hand. Pride is a cat that sits on your chest and purrs while you suffocate. Thank you, I said. We'll pay you back. You won't, he said. And that's fine. When he left, I called Kyle. It took him 2 calls to answer. And when he did, his voice had that carbonation that means you've slept all day and just woken up.
Hey, he said.
Merry Christmas. Oliver and I left my dad's. I said, no preamble. I listened to how that sounded in the air. There was a pause. Okay, he said carefully. Are you safe? Yes, I said. Do you need? He trailed off. He has never been great with nouns in the presence of real responsibility. I need you to keep your stuff out of this, I said. I need you to not cause a problem at Dad's, because that will make it worse for me. I need you to stay steady if Oliver needs a pickup on a day I can't do it. I can do that, he said, and I heard something like relief in his voice. People love to be asked for something they can do. It makes them feel necessary. It's not nothing. I can bring by his Lego set, he added, eagerness creeping in. Drop it with Serena, I said. Don't come in. Okay, he said. Okay. Merry Christmas. I hung up and put the phone down like it weighed more than it should. Serena raised an eyebrow. He doing the basics. He's offering Lego, I said. It's a start. Over the next days, our plan became a path. Tessa met me in the hospital cafeteria and slid 2 forms across the table and explained in simple sentences how we'd use them. If you need a notarized letter, the notary in the basement is kind, she said. Don't worry if you cry. She keeps tissues. I went to the bank to get copies of deposit records because it was the only way to show what was happening. The teller called the manager, who walked like he'd practiced walking for a commercial. He asked me questions as if I were asking to take money that didn't belong to me, which, technically, maybe I was. I need documentation for an appeal, I said. My father is the representative payee. I need to show how funds are being used. That's between your father and Social Security, he said. We cannot give you records on an account that isn't in your name. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go to a megaphone and stand in the lobby and say, I'm trying to stop a man from buying screws with money that came with Oliver on the memo line. I understand, I said. I did not understand. I understood process and how it keeps people from running into rooms and grabbing, and I also understood how process protects the person who knows how to slow you down. There are other ways. You learn this when you have been given an objective and no clear path. I went home and counted. I opened my notebook. I made a grid. Donations. Estimated. Dates. He had posted when big sums came in. He liked to brag. I used his bragging to build a picture. The SSI. The dates checks arrived from Social Security were on the letter he'd left on the counter because he likes to leave a trail when he thinks it's a road that ends in his driveway. The deck materials. I went to the store and asked for an estimate for the lumber and screws he'd bought. We can't give out receipts, the sales guy said, and then he looked at Oliver and at me, and he wrote the estimate on the back of a business card and slid it to me like we were in a movie about spies. It was a number that made the hair on my arms rise. I met with Legal Aid of Western Ohio the Monday after New Year's. Their office was in a building that smelled like paper and old coffee and the kind of hustle that happens when your work is plugging holes in boats. A lawyer named Dana, with blunt cut bangs and a tattoo on her wrist that looked like a semicolon, listened while I told the long version of our short fall out of grace. She took notes. She asked smart questions. Is the GoFundMe in your name? No, my dad's. What does the page say the funds are for? Medical costs and living expenses while Oliver is in treatment. Does it state who controls the funds? It implies family. It says we a lot. She nodded, writing. Okay, she said. Here's the thing about GoFundMe. The money belongs to the organizer. It's not legally restricted. It's messy because donors think it's for the person in the photo, and ethically that matters. Legally, it's less clear. The SSI is clear. Misuse carries consequences. If we show misuse, SSA can require repayment and reassign the payee. We can also send a demand letter regarding the GoFundMe, not because it's illegal, but because it's wrong in the way that plays badly in a small town. Sometimes that matters just as much. If the consequence is reputation, I said, testing the word in my mouth. If the consequence is pressure, she said. People hate public accountability if they've built their identity on being the hero. I looked at my hands. My nails had paper dust under them. I thought of my father's ring tapping. I thought of the kitchen and the smell of lemon cleaner. I thought of that word he used, leech, and how it had boiled something in my blood and made it crusty at the edges. I'm not trying to hurt him, I said. I just want control back. I just want my child's money to be his. Sometimes consequences are educational, Dana said. They inform future behavior. She said it in a way that indicated she believed in that sentence enough to pay her rent with it. We filed the request with Social Security for payee reassignment. We attached the letter from Oliver's oncologist and Tessa's statement and my notebook scans and the hardware estimate with my father's phone number written in the corner because the sales guy had been helpful in his own vague way. We attached a statement from me. I wrote it at Serena's table with Oliver coloring next to me with his expensive markers, doing a dinosaur with a rainbow tail. The current payee has used funds for home improvements and household costs, not directly benefiting the beneficiary. I wrote, and then I wrote, the current payee has also withheld both financial information and decision-making from the beneficiary's parent. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. We sent a demand email regarding the GoFundMe, polite and firm, asking for a full accounting of funds received and spent, and for all remaining funds to be transferred to an account I closed and reopened the same day so it would be clean. Dana said, "He won't like this," and I said, "I expect to be disliked," and then I went home and put my phone in a drawer and sat on the floor and cried into my hands while Oliver napped because, truth be told, I do not like to be disliked. It feels like a draft under the door that turns your bones to ice. Dad texted the next day, "We need to talk." It wasn't a question. It never was. I sat on the idea of answering until it warmed up. Then I wrote back, "We can meet at the coffee shop.
Public.
I will not come to the house." He sent back a thumbs up. That surprised me, the emoji, a concession to something new, and also a little mocking. Thumbs up. I acknowledge your boundary and do not respect it. At the shop, he stood in line behind me and made a show of paying. He told the barista my name like he was announcing me at a banquet. When we sat, he didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask how Oliver was. He got right to it like always, like efficient harm. "What is this?" he said, waving the email printout like he'd pulled it from the archives. "What is this you're doing?" "Trying to regain control of how we keep your grandson alive," I said. I needed to invoke the person being affected without weaponizing his body. "It's a weird line." "I kept you from the street," he said. "I kept the heat on. I kept you from making a fool of yourself." "By making a fool of me," I said, "in front of a handful of napkins and a ham."
He scoffed.
"Don't be dramatic." "You called me a leech," I said. "That's the kind of dramatic that breeds mold."
He leaned in. "You sent an email to strangers accusing me of theft. You went to a lawyer like I'm a criminal. You did that to me." "You did this to yourself," I said. "I'll be clear because clarity helps me sleep. If I find out you spent one GoFundMe dollar on that deck or one SSI check on anything with your name on it, I will tell the world." He sat back and laughed. It was the Real laugh, the belly one, the one people loved. "You think I care what people think," he said. "I think you care so much you'd get up in the middle of a funeral to adjust someone's impression of you," I said. "A middle image. A foretelling I didn't know I was making. I think you built your whole house on other people believing you're in the right." He stared at me a long time. It was a stare I knew from my childhood, when I had dared to tell him how he made me feel and then had to wait under that stare to see if the floor would hold. "I am not the villain in your story," he said. He meant it. That is one of the hardest things about all of this. He believed he was saving us. "You can be good in one chapter and bad in another," I said. "That's legacy. You don't get to decide." He stood to leave. He looked at me like I was someone he was trying to figure out how to hold a wrench to. "You're dead to me if you go through with this," he said. He said it casually like it was an option I could remove by backing down. "I've already left," I said. It wasn't the dramatic line it sounds like. It was an inventory. The house.
I tapped my chest.
This.
You did that when you said the word at our table. I met his eyes.
Leech.
He swallowed. The jaw moved.
He left.
He did not slam the door because we were in public. People don't slam doors in public. They just leave their anger on the table like a tip and let everyone else work around it. That afternoon, Social Security called. I braced for a list of things I'd failed to provide. The woman on the line sounded stern and also secretly kind, like a librarian I would have respected as a child. We've received your request, she said. We take these allegations seriously. We need to ask a few more questions. The questions were simple and humiliating in the way of all paperwork. They made me say things out loud I'd been trying to keep in a drawer marked later. I answered them. The woman listened. She said, "We'll need to speak with Mr. Monroe," and my stomach dropped because I knew how he would frame it. He would use that voice with the authority he'd gathered with decades and coats and a shop full of men who nodded when he spoke. "Can I submit one more letter?" I said. "From our nurse. She can speak to who is here at 3 a.m.
Send it, she said.
When I hung up, I sat with Oliver on the couch, and we watched a movie about a penguin who gets lost and finds his way home by smelling his mother's breath. Oliver's head fit under my chin like it had when he was new. I stroked his hair, and I thought about breath and about how many times a day I was holding mine. The reveal. The SSA decision didn't come for weeks. That's how it goes. You do the part you can do. You send the letters into a machine. You wait. You hope there's someone on the other side who sees what you are trying to do and isn't more afraid of the rules than of the harm. Meanwhile, life asks to be lived. We moved into the apartment on Linden with the help of Serena and Mark and 2 of Serena's baristas who lifted the couch like it was a conversation they were excited to have. The apartment was drafty and the windows stuck in the tracks, and the fridge made a clunk at night like there was a small person inside objecting to the milk. It was ours. I put the pumpkin farm photo on the mantel even though there was nothing to anchor it, and it slid off twice before it stayed. Oliver picked the bedroom with the weird closet because it felt like a fort. He lined his cars up on the sill. He lay in the bed with the turtle and said, "We live here," like he was reciting a new spelling word. We met the neighbor downstairs, a woman named Deja, who wore a scarf and had a laugh that reminded me of my aunt who moved to Florida and only sent postcards of birds. She watched Oliver for an hour so I could go to the grocery store alone one day, and when I got back, she had taught him how to make paper cranes. He liked folding. It gave him a feeling of being in charge of the outcome. I balanced the checkbook. I said no to myself about things like the fancy yogurt and said yes to strawberry jam because it made Oliver eat toast without a bargaining session. I took a shift 2 mornings a week back at the clinic because they held the job for me like a space in line, and I cried in the bathroom after my first morning and then put on mascara again and walked out and checked a kid in for their vaccine and said, "How are you doing?" in a tone that suggested I meant it. I kept cook-up coffee in the house the way my father did, and I corrected myself every time I started calling it the way we do, because I was building a new we, and language matters. I paid the landlord with pride like I was getting an A in a class I'd been told I couldn't handle. I put Oliver in the tub and sat on the linoleum and read emails from the SSA over the sound of water. I learned to intercept worry before it crashed into my day like a car through a front window. Some days I failed. Some days I won. The demand letter to my father about the GoFundMe started a bonfire. I braced. He emailed back 6 sentences that were legal adjacent and more insulting than helpful. "You're embarrassing yourself," he wrote. "You don't understand how money works." I used it for household needs agreed upon by all parties. I replaced the water heater that kept your bath from being cold. "You're ungrateful." The word ungrateful is a family heirloom we pass down like a casserole dish. It is also a blunt tool. Dana sent another letter, less polite. It requested a full accounting by a specific date and threatened to go public with the donor list if he didn't comply. "We prefer to handle this quietly," she wrote, and I smiled because sometimes lawyers know how to write sentences that sit in your mouth sweet. He didn't respond. He did, however, post on the Operation Oliver page about controversies and family disagreements and people who don't understand what it takes to keep the lights on. He called the GoFundMe the community's gift and said that any implication that it had been used in any way other than sustaining Oliver was malicious. He used that word. Malicious. He knows big words when he's mad. The comments were what comments are always going to be. Half the town fell over themselves to say, "You're a rock, Dennis," and "Haters gonna hate," and "You do what you need to do, we trust you." The other half shut up and sent me screenshots quietly asking, "Do you want me to say something?" And I told them no. I didn't want to turn Oliver into a content war. Then something happened I didn't expect. One of the donors, a man who owned the car wash off Maine, messaged me. "Hey, Emily," he wrote. "We gave $1,500 from a fundraiser we did at the wash. People came through for y'all. I just want to make sure it helped. Call me if you want." He put his number in the message like a challenge. I called. He answered on the second ring, loud music in the background and the swoosh of big brushes. "Hey," he said. "Yeah. Thank you," I said. "It did help. I am trying to figure out how to be in charge of it." I told the truth. He whistled. "I'm sorry," he said. "People like to be the guy." I get it. I also hate when the guy forgets who the story is about. He paused. "You want receipts for the checks we cut? Might help." "Yes," I said, too fast. "Yes, please." He had a secretary named Joanne who had been keeping books since the 80s and who kept a file folder with the words, "Benefit, Monroe," in neat, old lady cursive. She scanned the checks and the dates and sent them to me with a little note. "Hate this for you. Rooting." The note made me cry harder than the checks made me. People are the reason I still believe anything about this world. More messages trickled in from people who had given big amounts. The baseball league. The school fundraiser that had sold lollipops with Oliver's face. A woman named Marisol who ran a knitting group and had done a craft fair with hats and blankets and handed my father a wad of cash in an envelope. They all provided some peace. The picture came into focus. It was not good. The deck cost $4,200 in materials. The household reported costs rose by $300 a month after the GoFundMe money started flowing. The water heater was $1,100. The miscellaneous category was a black hole where you put your scruples. If I had been auditing a stranger's books, I would have said this. They are playing games with categories in a way that would get them called into an office if the office were neutral. The office is not neutral. The office is a family. Dana drafted a formal complaint to Social Security. It wasn't a pretty letter I wrote. It was numbers and dates and line items. The part one loved most was the middle paragraph, where she wrote, "We believe Mr. Monroe acted with the belief that his decisions were in the best interests of his household." The subject of this complaint is the benefit of the child, which was subordinated to other priorities. "We seek reassignment not as punishment, but as correction." It was generous and sharp and felt like how I wanted to be in the world, clear without cruelty, severe when necessary, precise. A week later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and I stood in the grocery store staring at the display of oranges like a person in a painting who has to decide between juice and the other kind of juice. It was Social Security. They spoke in a voice that was calm because they wanted the phone call to go okay. "We have reassigned the representative payee to the parent, Emily Monroe," she said. "We will also be requesting an accounting of the prior year and pursuing repayment of misused funds, if any." "If any," she said. It wasn't if you could drive a truck through. It was also the if you get when you do things the right way and you trust structures. It was enough. I leaned on the oranges and tried not to let my knees go. "We will send you forms," she said. "I'm sorry it took so long." "Thank you," I said. I put my hand on my stomach and remembered a day in a different fruit aisle when Oliver was a baby, and I had spent all day trying to get him to latch and felt like I was failing at being a mammal, and then he fell asleep in the sling and I stared at the fruit because it was there and colorful and felt like the world was still capable of giving. I got through that day. I could get through this one. I texted the news to Serena and Tessa and Mark. Mark texted back a string of emojis he must have shown his students once, and then kept because he liked the faces they made. Tessa wrote, "You did that." Serena wrote, "I'm buying oranges." I put 6 oranges in the cart. It was excessive. I wanted the wait. That night, my father called. He didn't text. He wanted to use his voice to walk into my house. I let it ring twice because it is mature to not jump. I answered. He didn't say hello.
How dare you, he said.
I followed the process, I said. You know how to respect a process when it serves you. You humiliated me, he said. At the bank. At the office. A man called me and asked me to explain myself like I was a junkie skimming the rent. You humiliated yourself, I said, and I realized I was using the clean sentences Dana had given me, like she'd handed me a wrench I could finally grip. You made choices. Respectfully, your choices are your consequences.
Pause.
Breathing. He was quiet in that way he gets when he is trying to decide if he hits me with charm or with a hammer. I paid for your food, he said. I made sure your heat was on. I took care of your son when you were at the hospital. You want to talk about numbers? Fine. Let's talk about numbers. You owe me.
I don't, I said.
I owe Oliver. I owe myself. I owe the people who gave to help us both and asked me to keep it clean and on target. I do not owe you a version of myself that fits in your story where everything good came from you. He grunted. Ungrateful, he said, pulling the heirloom down off the shelf with a dust rag. I'm grateful to the man you were some days, I said. I'm not grateful to this one. He hung up. I sat with the phone in my lap and waited for the sadness to swamp me. It didn't, not fully. It lapped at my feet and then got bored and went to find something more porous. We got the forms. I filled them out with the seriousness of a person signing a treaty. I bought a little safe with a code and put the cards in it. It felt silly, in our small apartment with a floor sway, to have a safe. It made me laugh. I need you to know I laughed, because the next part of this story is the part where the universe, by which I mean disease, asserts itself, and I want to remember the light. Oliver's relapse required a new protocol at Cincinnati Children's, an hour south. It meant weeks in a room with a view of a different parking lot and a different pretzel place in the lobby. It meant a scanorama of my life viewed from a new angle, new nurses and the same jokes, new beep sounds and the same kind of knot in my throat. We packed again. We did our ancient ritual.
Socks.
Pants.
Turtle.
Mark drove us. Serena packed us a bag with snacks labeled by hour because she has learned I will forget to eat if I am in charge of other things. Cincinnati children's rooms are big if you have a kid who likes to line up cars. The lights are less flickery. The nurses are equally as kind. They drew Oliver's blood while pretending to be spies. He loved that. He loves when a task has a mission. The doctor talked protocols and statistics and used the word odds in a way that made me understand why people like casinos. It gives you something to focus on that looks like a number. The treatment made Oliver sick and then sicker. He lost what was left of his hair. He lost his eyebrows and looked like an alien in a way he found funny. I look surprised all the time, he said, lifting his eyebrows that weren't there. He threw up less because they had the right mix of anti-nausea now, but he had days where he slept and slept. I watched him breathe. I read to him about penguins, again and again, because it was a book he liked, and I like to read the same thing when I am scared. It feels like a ramp you can climb with your eyes shut. My father called 3 times that month. I answered once. He said, "How's he doing?" in a tone that sounded like someone trying to remember a song. I told him the truth. He said, "When are you coming back?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "You can't keep him away from me." And I said, "This isn't about you." He said, "I did the best I could." And I said, "Sometimes the best you can do hurts people." And then he hung up. Rita texted me a picture of the deck with a potted plant on it and the caption, "It's really nice when the sun hits it." Like that would move me. It didn't. It did a little. I am not bulletproof. It is hard to unlove a person you once aligned or day to. We had one miraculous week where Oliver's numbers danced like they were going to settle in an acceptable pattern. He sat up and ate a popsicle and made a crane out of the paper wrapper like Deja had shown him. He asked if we could go to the aquarium on the way home, a big ask. I looked at the nurse, and she lifted her eyebrows that were very much there and said, "We can make this happen if he keeps this up," and for an hour, I believed. The thing about stories is that once you've told that part, you can't then pretend you didn't hope. It makes what happened next feel like a betrayal, even though the universe is incapable of betraying you. It just rolls its dice. Oliver's body said no. It said it quietly, then louder. The numbers went wrong. The doctor got softer. The room felt like it was made of commentary. We had a meeting where someone shut the door and sat with their hands folded and talked about quality of life. They talked about options and listed them like items on a takeout menu that we couldn't afford. I listened with my whole face, because that is respect. I said, "What would you do if this were your son?" And the doctor put her hand on the table and said, "I would take him home."
We did.
We took him home. Not to my father's house. To the apartment on Linden with the sway in the kitchen and the funny fridge. Deja brought over paper cranes and a casserole that tasted like salt, and Serena brought the kind of cream you make whipped cream with because Oliver loved watching anything become something else. Hospice came with a nurse named Margot who wore sneakers and spoke like she was reading a bedtime story, and a box of supplies that made me jealous of how much good foam can cost. She asked me what our goals were. I never want to do anything with that question again, ever. I said, comfort, like a potion I hoped would work. Oliver lay on the couch. He watched the ceiling fan make its endless decision. He held my hand and said, "I don't feel scared." And I said, "You don't have to," and I meant it, and I broke a little more in a part of me I didn't know was there. He watched videos of penguins and fell asleep mid-laugh, and I made a sound like a person hitting ice when they don't expect to. My father showed up on the second day. He knocked and then let himself in because he thinks walls are a suggestion. He looked around the place with his eyes and made a list of things to criticize. He didn't say any of them out loud. He went to the couch. He put his hand on Oliver's hair, on the little stubble, and he said, "Hey, buddy," and his voice broke. He sat there a minute. He breathed. He didn't know what to do with his hands after. He stood. He turned to me. "They reassigned the payee," he said. "They sent me a letter." "I know," I said. "They sent me one, too." He nodded. "They want me to pay back certain amounts." "They do," I said. I would not soften. He could carry his own choices to wherever he needed to put them. He looked at the wall. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I thought I was keeping us afloat." "Us," I said, and he flinched because I had learned to apply pressure like a finger on a bruise. He looked at Oliver. He looked at me. "You think I'm a monster," he said. It was a statement dressed like a question. "I think you think control is love," I said. "I think that has made you useful and dangerous. I think you are a person I will miss when you are not terrible." He closed his eyes. He opened them. "I'll fix it," he said, and his jaw worked, and I saw a young man inside him, one I had not met. It made me feel like I was too late to everything. "You can start by giving me the donor list," I said. "We're going to write them thank yous, with actual receipts attached." He laughed, once, like a person letting air out of a tire. "Okay," he said. He left. 2 days later, Oliver died. It happened the way nurses tell you it will, if they are good at their jobs and honest in their hearts. It happened in the afternoon, when the light in our living room goes gold and the plant near the window looks like it's been plugged in. He was in my arms. He breathed and then didn't. He did not look scared. He did not look like he was leaving. He looked like he was going to finish the nap and then ask me to make toast. There is a sound you make then. It is not a scream. It is not anything. It is a hole in you opening, and the sound is the air rushing in. Serena was there. Margot was there. Deja came up the stairs and sat on the floor and put her hand on my ankle like she was anchoring me. Mark arrived like he'd left the stove on. Tasha took the kids to her mother's. My father came and sat, and he did not speak. Rita brought a quilt and laid it at the foot of the couch like we might need it for later. People do strange and beautiful and misguided things in the vicinity of grief. I said thank you for the quilt, because that is a thing you can say in this life, when nothing else seems to apply. I held Oliver a long time. Margot asked if we wanted to bathe him.
We did.
We used warm water and the cloths from the hospice box that felt like the softest of anything, and we washed him like he was a baby, like he was in every way the beginning and the end of something, and I cried and said his name like a song, and I said, "Thank you," into his neck, and I said, "I love you, I love you, I love you," even though I don't think those words count like points in any game. I said them because I needed to hear them, because he taught me to say what I mean. We held a small service a week later at the community center because I couldn't stand the idea of the funeral home with the smell of flowers that had nowhere to be. We put out photos and cranes and cars. We put out a jar of markers and asked people to write down a memory of Oliver and put it in a big glass bowl because I could not trust my mind to keep them, and I needed something to catch what might fall. I asked the baseball coach to speak, and he did, and I asked Deja to read a poem about winter light, and she did, and I asked Serena to talk about pretzels, and she did, and it was perfect, and there is no such thing as perfect in this part of the map, but it was close. My father asked to speak. He sent me a text, and then another, and then he cornered me in the kitchen of the community center while the coffee percolated, and the ladies who always run everything set out cookies on plates. "I need to say something," he said, arms spread like he was going to grab the room. "You can write something," I said. "I'll read it." "That's not the same," he said. "I know," I said. "It's the one I can give you." He went to his car. He sat there. He came back with a piece of paper folded twice, like a receipt. He handed it to me. "Don't make me look bad," he said, and I looked at him like he'd said a child's joke that should be funnier than it is. I stood up at the front. My knees were shaking. My voice did the thing voices do at funerals, where the words have to pass through a net you can't see. I read his statement. He said he loved Oliver, which was true. He said Oliver was brave, which was true. He said we had been strong as a family, which was sometimes true. He said that people need to stick together because the world is hard, which was a sentence that made me want to hand him a list of caveats. I read it anyway. I made my mouth loose around the words and let them go. He cried quietly. Rita dabbed his face like she was erasing pencil marks. When the service was over, people hugged him. They said, "You're a rock, Dennis." He took it. He needed it, and I let him have it because he was a human being who had lost his grandson, and because sometimes we give people what they need even when they have not earned it in the day-to-day ledger. After the service, people put money in a donation box without me asking. I had written on the sign, in Oliver's name, to fund craft kits for the oncology floor, because that felt like the opposite of a deck, because it felt like something I could see and touch and put into the hands of a kid who needed the sensation of being in charge of color. The box filled. I stood next to it with my hand on it like I had my hand on a sleeping animal. My father stood across the room, and he looked at the box and then looked at me, and in that glance I saw him understand that he did not own this story anymore. It was mine. It was Oliver's. It was ours, the new we I had started to build with Serena and Mark and Deja and Dana and Tessa and Margot and the car wash guy and the baristas with surprisingly strong arms. After the service, my father came up to me with a manila envelope. He handed it to me like he was making a hostage exchange. "The donor list," he said. "And receipts." His face looked like it had been sandpapered. His ring was off. I had never seen his ring off. "Thank you," I said. I took it. I was careful to not let him see my relief. It would have given him something to stick in his pocket and pull out later when he wanted to remind me that once he had given me something. He nodded, awkward. He touched my shoulder. "He loved you," he said. "It was an offering. He gets to have his offerings." "You are a good mother," he added, and his voice broke like a bone. I held his eyes. "Thank you," I said. It was true. I needed to hear it. People surprise me with their capacity for saying the right thing, sometimes. It didn't undo everything. It sat next to everything like a cup on a table. The day after the service, Dana called with the SSA's decision about the repayment. "They have determined misuse," she said. "They will seek repayment from your father. There will be a schedule. You will not receive those funds. That is not how this works. But the record exists." "Okay," I said. The word again, a raft. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The snow in the alley had that dirty city snow look I love because it is honest. The plant by the window was being a plant, unemotional, faithfully turning toward the light. Oliver's cranes hung from a string Serena had put up between the two curtains. They turned slightly in the heat from the vent, like they were stretching their wings. I cried again, with less urgency, like a faucet on its last drip. The good kind. The kind that just wets the sink and then stops. Grief is boring. No one tells you that. It's repetitive in the same way breathing is repetitive, necessary, mostly automatic, sometimes interrupted by a gasp. The days after the service were all laundry and dishes and emails from people who wanted to help 3 weeks too late, and then were still worth thanking. My body moved through the tasks like it had been trained in a factory. Fold, stack, put away, stare, consider if eating is something your mouth still knows how. The legal parts moved without me. Dana handled the SSA follow-ups and sent me copies I filed in a blue folder labeled Things That Matter and Don't Change Today. She also sent me a draft of a civil complaint regarding the GoFundMe, a long shot. Unjust enrichment, she said. It's not a slam dunk. It's a story problem. A judge may care about the narrative more than the law in a new way. Or not. But we draft it to say who you are and what he did. I read it at night, with the sound of the train from 3 blocks away cutting through the chill. It was strange to see my life in declarative sentences. Plaintiff's minor child was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia in 2018. That could have been a sentence in a grant proposal. It read like it had happened to someone else. I signed it. We filed it. I went back to the couch and the cranes and the plant and the quiet my fingers made when they pressed into the cushion. My father sent me a text with a photo of himself at the Social Security office holding a form. I took care of it, he wrote, as if that needed to be said, as if the extraneous imprint of his competence could reshape the story. I wrote back, good, and put my phone on airplane mode because sometimes it is your job to turn off the world. Rita called and asked if I wanted to pick up a Tupperware of chicken and rice. She said she had labeled it with the date. I said, not today, and I pictured her putting the Tupperware in the freezer like a time capsule of love that tastes like control.
She meant well.
I needed to not take her meaning into my house for a while. Mark came on Tuesdays and sat on the floor and built a city out of blocks with me because it was comforting to build something with your hands when everything else felt like a theoretical exercise. We didn't talk much. We made bridges and then demolished them for the pleasure of the crash, a thing kids know and adults need reminded of. One morning, I opened the envelope of donors for my father. It wasn't comprehensive. It was a set of names with amounts in his handwriting and a few printouts from the site. It was messy in the way his paperwork has always been messy, organized by a logic that only gestures toward order. I made a spreadsheet. I emailed Joanne at the car wash and thanked her for the check we had used on groceries that month. I wrote the baseball league a note that said, you helped buy 8 boxes of the kind of gloves that don't leave powder on your hands. I wrote Marisol and told her Oliver had worn the hat she knitted to the park and had made a guy on a bench say, nice threads, and Oliver had walked differently the rest of the way. I did this for weeks. It was the only kind of math that soothed me. Money in, money out. A story about how a child's life had been made easier by a tangible object, and then a letter to a person who had meant well saying thank you in non-lazy words. It felt like stitching something I could not repair. It kept my hands busy, which is an ancient trick for surviving a winter. The civil complaint moved into a phase called discovery, which sounds dramatic and is mostly email. Dana requested bank statements related to the GoFundMe account. My father's lawyer, a man named Kirk, wrote back with a tone I recognize from men who have always been in rooms where they are the default voice. We went back and forth, which is to say Dana sent polite emails that were also knives and Kirk responded with the kind of legalese that makes everyone feel like they're doing work. Finally, he produced 3 months of transactions. It told a story anyone could see.
Deposits in.
Home Depot out. The water heater.
The deck.
A charge at a local appliance store that turned out to be a dryer. Some groceries, yes.
Some gas, yes.
A miscellaneous that was a payment to Dennis Monroe with a note repayment. It made my hands cold. People could see this, Dana said. You could post it. She wasn't advising me to. She was asking who I wanted to be. I don't want to turn my son's treatment into content, I said. I think about this a lot. There are economies attached to pain. People make money telling stories like mine. People make rent with the right thread. I am telling you this slowly because I want to be honest about the ways money and narrative intertwine. I want a story to be clean, I said. I want the ending to be a kid at the hospital with markers we bought in his name. Then we settle, Dana said. He cuts a check. He agrees not to touch any money attached to Oliver ever again. We write a clause about praising you publicly and then never mentions you again in a fundraising context. We write a clause about not interfering with your relationships. We write a clause about not showing up uninvited at your home. We write the boundaries into a document that can be enforced by a court. Can a court enforce love? I asked, and she laughed in a way that was not unkind. No, she said, but it can enforce distance. Sometimes that's the best gift. We settled. He cut a check. Not the amount that would have made the ledger satisfyingly even. Enough to fund the craft kits for 2 years. Enough to pay Mark back for the water heater money he'd handed me at Serena's door. Enough to make me feel like the universe had not entirely lost the thread. He signed the order that said he wouldn't show up uninvited. He signed the order that said he wouldn't post about me. He signed the order that said if he did, there were fines and other dull mechanisms that would kick in. I signed too. I went home and wrote another letter to a donor, and then I lay on the couch and watched the shadow of the plan on the wall. It looked like a child waving. I waved back. I didn't talk to my father for 4 months. In a different life, we might have found our way back through small tasks. He would have needed help with a thing in the workshop and texted me a photo and a question. I would have answered with a tool suggestion. He would have called me from a store and asked me if I needed light bulbs. I would have said yes, and he would have felt useful. In that life, we might have made a path that was narrow and weird and acceptable. This life required a sharper cut. It kept me safer than a narrow bridge would have. Rita wrote me a card with a watercolor flower and said she was taking a ceramics course. She said grief had made her hands want to make something. She said if I wanted a plate, she could make one. I did not want a plate. I understood the gesture. I put the card in a drawer. We can keep things for what they mean, and not for what they are. Mark kept showing up. Serena kept showing up. Deja knocked on the first snow day of the year and said, "Want to come outside and breathe the air that tastes like clean?" And we stood on the back steps and breathed and said nothing, and then went inside, and I made us grilled cheese because there are days when grilled cheese is how you say, "I see you and I'm here." Work asked me if I wanted more hours. I said yes. The first day back full-time, I put on the lanyard with my name tag, Emily Monroe, front desk, and took a long look at my face in the office bathroom. I looked like a person who had been through something. That's all. People came in with their kids, and I did what I had always done, which is to say I made them feel like their life could be contained in the 15 minutes between check-in and getting their child measured and weighed. It's a service. It fills a day in ways that feel human. One afternoon, a mom with a baby on her chest and a 2-year-old chewing on her sleeve stood at my desk and started to cry because she had lost the WIC card and didn't know what to do, and she hadn't slept more than 40 minutes in a stretch, and her husband was offshore, and her mother-in-law gave her advice that made her feel like she was failing. I slid a tissue box across the desk like a bartender. "You are not failing," I said. "You are one person doing a 3-person job. You're tired." She cried harder. She said, "Thank you," as if I'd given her money. I thought about GoFundMe and about how the real economy runs on sentences. Time has no manners. It moves without your permission. It carried me into a spring where the cranes faded a little and the plant needed repotting. It carried me into a day where I could talk about Oliver without my throat closing like a door in a wind. It carried me into small pleasures I resented because they existed in a world without him, and then it carried me until I didn't resent them, just held them and let them be. It carried me into a summer where the kids on our street set up a lemonade stand, and I drank a cup so sour it made my jaw ache and laughed with Deja until my side hurt. It carried me into a fall where I bought school supplies even though I didn't have a reason and gave them to the community center because the itch to buy crayons doesn't leave just because you don't fill a pencil box anymore. It carried me to court one morning in September where I watched my father's name on a docket and then my own. He wore a suit that didn't fit him right because he had lost weight in a way that made me want to feed him, and also made me want to scream.
He didn't look at me.
We sat at white tables with a lip that always catches your sleeve, and the judge ran through the orders like checking off a list of broken appliances. You will not. You will not. You will not. If you do, then, and then the gavel, and everyone stood, and it felt both momentous and silly, which is to say very human. After, in the hall, he approached me, and then seemed to think better of it, and then approached anyway because ambivalence is a thing he does in a straight line. You look like your mother, he said, out of nowhere. It is a sentence he has never said to me. I didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or a curse. I took it as the first thing. He cleared his throat.
You were right, he said.
About some of it. It was the best apology I would get. It was not what I wanted in the long list of wants I had stored in the part of my brain labeled fantasy land. It was enough to let me walk down the stairs without wanting to push him. I nodded. I'm building something new, I said. He nodded, too. He stood there like I should tell him what it was, and I didn't. He doesn't get to be the first to know about the things I build anymore. What I was building, I applied to a community college program for social work, part-time, because Tessa and Margot and Dana had shown me what a particular kind of human work looks like, and I wanted to be the person at the other end of the phone saying, we can make a plan. I took one class, then two. I read at night. I wrote papers that made me angry and made me feel like my anger might go to good use. I worked at the clinic during the day and brought muffins that Serena had baked because she needed a project on Sundays when the coffee shop was closed. What I was building, an Oliver fund, small and homegrown, with a bank account that was in my name and a board that was Mark and Serena and Deja and two of the nurses from the floor who said yes when I asked because they had watched me carry a weight and knew I would not drop a kid on purpose. We bought craft kits and pizza for the call room and gas cards for parents and a set of good blankets because hospital blankets are made to be washed, not loved. We sent thanks with receipts and we posted photos with permission and we kept the fund open and small by design because I had learned what happens when a single story gets too big for its container. Receipts over rumors, I wrote on the site and we meant it and we did it and it became a thing people said back to me in the grocery store with a grin. What I was building, a life where holidays were quiet and strange and ours. The first Christmas after Oliver died, Serena and I drove to Hocking Hills and rented a one-room cabin with a heater that clicked and a bed that squeaked and a view of trees like a painting you can't quite get right. We made eggs on a hot plate, and we drank bourbon because we are adults and because it was cold, and I read a book out loud about penguins because I couldn't help myself, and we cried, and we laughed that we cried, and we named the things we missed, and we named the things we could do now that felt like theft and also like tribute, and we went to bed early, and we woke up to a quiet that felt holy without anyone needing to declare it so. I sent Rita a card with a watercolor flower, because I am a person who cannot help but send a card when a thought occurs. I wrote, I hope you are well. Thank you for the food. I am making plates out of trash and calling it art, a joke she would get, and she wrote back. I made a bowl, all it took was 10 tries, and I texted her a photo of the cranes and she sent me a photo of the deck with a different plant, and we lived in that strange adjacency that isn't friendship, isn't family exactly, is maybe its own category, witness. My father, and I didn't fix it. I saw him at Mark's house for a birthday dinner for Ella, and we stood in the same room and did not set off our alarms. He handed me a cup of coffee. He didn't say anything. Later, he texted me a photo of a penguin from the paper with the words, made me think of him, and I appreciated the spare syllables. He was trying. I was trying. We were not what we had been. We were not what we had hoped. We were better than the worst day in December. That sounds like faint praise. It is, in fact, a cathedral. The epilogue artifact. A letter from me to Oliver, found in my desk the 2nd December after. Hey, kid. I'm writing at the ugly desk with a burn mark from the time you and I tried to melt a crayon into a candle. The plant by the window is doing okay. I repotted it. I didn't kill it. You would approve. You are kinder than I am to things that can wilt. Today it snowed, the clumpy snow you liked. I stood on the back step and caught some on my tongue like a person standing under a waterfall in a movie, and the neighbor kid laughed, and then I laughed. And then the dog in the building across the alley barked, and it all felt like the world was applauding a joke that didn't need to be funny. I miss you. I miss the curve of your ear, and the way your eyebrows disappeared, and the tiny freckle on your knee like someone had doted you on purpose. I miss your little feet on the stairs and the way your breathing changed when you fell into a deep sleep. I miss being able to hand you a red marker and know that, for exactly 6 minutes, you would be satisfied. I have a big envelope with stories about you, from other people. Some of them are dumb. They say things like, he was a fighter, and I know what they mean, but I also want to tell them, he was a kid who wanted to learn to whistle. I read the ones I want to read. I put the others in the back of the file. I am living without ever finishing anything. I didn't know people could do that. Turns out humans are very good at running on not quite. I started a thing in your name. We buy markers and glue that doesn't clump and paper that doesn't feather, and we make bags for kids who are staring at things that beep, and I write a note that says, you get to make something today. And sometimes I put a sticker in there and a little packet of hot chocolate because the nurses will let them cheat on water if it means they smile. I put your name on the label, not your whole name, because we're cautious with the internet, and sometimes I see a kid in the lobby with a bag and I think, we did that, and it doesn't make up for anything, but it puts a pointer on the map. I want you to know I am doing something with this, so it doesn't turn into just a gray place. I got you a little plaque on a bench at the park, the one near the diner where Uncle Mark likes the pie. It says, in memory of Oliver, who loved to make things and watch the light through leaves, and it's true. I go there sometimes and sit. Sometimes the bench is taken by someone on their phone telling someone else that they're going to be late, and I don't mind because benches are for bodies and for overheard sentences and for laughing loud and for baby strollers and for dogs who cannot be convinced to stop sniffing the same spot. Your bench has a history already. I like that. Your grandpa is quiet when I see him. He's learned some words that aren't terrible to say out loud. He has learned others he can't say yet. We have a kind of peace. It's not the kind where people link arms and walk at the same pace. It's the kind where we know which side of the street the other one is on, and don't cross without looking. It's safe enough. When I look at him now, I see a man who was a little boy once who probably wanted someone to tell him that he didn't have to force love to stay by counting it. It makes my stomach hurt. It makes me want to dig a hole and plant something and hope it grows. Serena says hi. She says you would love the new muffins. She says you are the reason she started putting animal crackers in the cup for kids without asking.
Deja says hi.
She hung cranes in the window for the new baby across the hall. Uncle Mark says hi, and also says he knows you would tell him his new shirt is too loud, which you always said, and he always ignored. Tasha says she saved the picture you drew of the 3 of them with the dog that looked like a ferret. I don't know what people mean when they talk about better places. I only know that when the light comes in the window at 4:49, it looks like the day you wanted toast and I burned it and you ate it anyway because you said, it's still toast, which remains the most generous review of my cooking. I hope wherever you are has toast the way you like it. I hope you run with kids who get your jokes. I hope there is a drawer with markers that never dry out. I will keep you here as long as I have a body to do it, not in a poor way. In the way people are containers and solvers and conductors of light. You are light. I will keep conducting. When I am tired, I will sit on your bench and make a list. You liked lists.
Me, too.
Love.
Mom.
What I learned. I used to think love was the person who stays. I have learned love is the person who respects your no so you can stay with yourself. I used to think a roof and a meal meant safety. I have learned safety is the room where you're not named something corrosive at dinner while your child listens. I used to think parents get to write the rules forever. I have learned your rules stop at the door of my house. I learned that receipts matter. Not metaphorically, though that, too, but literally. I learned that keeping track is a way of telling the truth to people who do not want to hear it. I learned that a little miscellaneous can hide a lot of harm. I learned that you can love someone and have to take them to court. I learned that you can be courteous in the hallway and still enforce the order that keeps him from knocking at midnight. The paperwork is not what heals you. It's what keeps the harm from repeating. There's a difference, and it's worth the work. I learned to trust the people whose job is to make it less impossible. The social worker, who knew the words for what I meant. The nurse who put her hand on my back without telling me not to cry. The lawyer who turned my story into a submission that got someone's attention. The barista who brewed coffee and handed me a sandwich and didn't make a speech. The neighbors who made paper cranes and remembered to ask, do you want to talk about him? And were not offended when the answer was no. I learned grief gets easier in the way calluses form, not because what hurts stops hurting, but because you build a capacity around it. I learned joy is allowed. I learned laughter feels like permission and like oxygen. I learned you can walk into a penguin exhibit in Cincinnati alone and stand in the cold and let yourself have something that belongs only to you for 20 minutes and then go back to the car and your life and everything that hurts, and everyone will still be there waiting. I learned my son was not a warrior or an angel or a lesson. He was a kid who loved penguins and paper cranes and pretzels, and the way light made the dust in the hallway visible. He continues to be what I learned, that the smallest voice in a house can tell the biggest truth. He said, "Are we in trouble?" And I said, "No." And I meant it, and I rearranged a life around that answer. Boundaries over blood is not an indictment. It's an instruction manual for how to keep your tenderness intact. It's a way to choose what kind of ancestor you want to be. So if you're standing in a kitchen at a holiday table and the person who should be your shelter calls you something slimy and your child looks at you and touches your sleeve like you're the person who will build the bridge, you can. You can say, "Okay," and stand up and pack a bag and drive to the apartment with the sway and the neighbor who laughs right. You can call the social worker. You can write the letters. You can ask the court to stand in the doorway with you. You can build a fund and a bench and a December with clumpy snow and not a ham in sight. You can.